Friends, we enter this solemn evening with the sadness that comes with death. It's not a welcome story, but it does have within it the power of new life. I invite you this evening to stand with me in this story, to listen for where you fit into the story, where you hear your voice expressed. All of us need to know just how desperately we need the mercy and new life that is offered to us on Easter. Listen for the love, the intimacy, the discouragement, the hope, the pain, the courage, the false pride, the unfaithfulness, that you may hear with new awareness on Easter the love and faithfulness of God, the giver of life. It was the day before Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. The religious leaders who collaborated with the Roman occupation were conspiring against Jesus. They had gathered in the place of Caiaphas, the high priest. This man had received the high priesthood at the hand of Valerius Gratus, the former Roman governor, who now retained the office under Pontius Pilate. They were all planning to quietly arrest and destroy Jesus so as to avoid a revolt among the Jews. Then one of the 12, named Judas, the son of Simon the Iscariot, went to the chief priests and asked, "What will you give me if I deliver Jesus to you?" And then they heard the offer. They were glad, and they promised Judas 30 pieces of silver. From that hour, he sought an opportunity to betray Jesus. At the beginning of the feast, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, the disciples of Jesus approached him and asked, "Where do you wish us to prepare the Paschal meal?" And Jesus took 2 of his disciples and instructed them, "Go into the city, and you will find there a man carrying a water jar. He will show you a suitable place." The 2 did as Jesus commanded. They entered the city, where they found the man with the water jar, who brought them to a large upper room.
When evening had come, Jesus arrived with the 12. While they were eating, he said, "I tell you truly that one of you is going to betray me." The disciples were stunned with grief and began to protest after one another, "Surely not I." Jesus replied, "The betrayer is one of you, dipping his hand into the dish with me. The Son of Man is fulfilling Scripture, but woe to that man through whom the Son of Man is betrayed." Then Judas slipped out into the night. As they were eating, Jesus took bread. After reciting the blessing, he broke it and gave it to his disciples and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." Then taking the cup with the traditional blessing, he gave it to his disciples, as he said, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is being shed for many. I tell you the truth, that I shall not drink again from the fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it fresh in the kingdom of God." Having sung a hymn, they left the city for the Mount of Olives. As they walked, Jesus said to his disciples, "You will all desert me this very night. So it is written in the prophet Zechariah, 'Strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered.'" Then Peter protested, "Though all desert, I will remain with you." Jesus replied, "I tell you truly that this very night, before the cock crows twice, you shall deny me 3 times." Still Peter maintained, "Even though I must die with you, I will never deny you." And so declared all of the disciples.
Jesus halted at an olive grove called Gethsemane. Then, going apart with Peter, James, and John, he left them on watch and continued a little further along. There he fell on his face in anguished prayer. Soon he returned to the 3 on watch and found them sleeping. Rousing them, he asked Peter, "Could you not watch with me for just 1 hour? Watch and pray that you are not put to the test. For the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Again, Jesus went apart in troubled prayer. And again he returned to find the disciples sleeping, for their eyes were heavy. Then a 3rd time Jesus withdrew to pray, and a 3rd time he found the disciples sleeping. Then Jesus said, "Sleep on and finish your rest. Now is the time for the Son of Man to be delivered into the hands of sinners. Here comes my betrayer."
Stay with me, stay with me, remain here, watch and pray.
Judas, one of his own disciples, arrived with a group of Roman soldiers and other armed men from the temple. Now the betrayer had arranged with the authorities for a sign, and he said, "The man whom I kiss is the one you want." In accord with this arrangement, Judas went directly to Jesus and cried out, "Greetings, Master," and then he gave him a kiss. Jesus responded, "Judas, would you betray the Son of Man with a kiss?" Immediately, the soldiers laid hands on Jesus and held him fast. And then one of the disciples with Jesus drew his sword and cut off the ear from the slave of the high priest. But Jesus said to him, "Sheath your sword. All who take up the sword will perish by the sword. Do you not know that I can call upon my Father and that he will respond? Have you come for me as against a rebel bandit with swords and clubs? Why did you not seize me in the temple where I sat teaching by day? Were you so afraid of the religious authorities that you must come for me by stealth?" And fled. Those who had seized Jesus brought him to Caiaphas, whom the Romans had made high priest. Peter followed at a distance, far as the courtyard. There he sat with the attendants and warmed himself by the fire. The high priest had gathered his whole council, and they began to arrange a case against Jesus, which they would present to Pontius Pilate, the governor. The charge was that Jesus claimed to be King of the Jews, and they brought in many false witnesses, but to no avail. Finally, 2 came forward and testified, "We heard this man say, 'I will tear down the temple made with hands, and within 3 days build another not made with hands.'" The testimony was evidence that Jesus claimed an authority over temple affairs which traditionally belonged only to the rulers of Israel, and in those days Israel was ruled by Rome. Yet even these witnesses were unable to agree on their testimony. Finally, Caiaphas stood up and examined Jesus directly. "Have you no answer for these charges?" demanded the high priest. Jesus remained silent and answered nothing. Then the high priest put the question of kingship in terms of royal titles, anointed and Son of God. "Are you the anointed one, the Son of the Blessed?" he probed. Jesus answered, "I am, and you shall see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming in the clouds of heaven." The high priest turned and said, "What need have we of witnesses? He has condemned himself." They all concurred that Jesus was indeed worthy of death. And then those holding Jesus began to spit on him. They covered his face and were striking him as they taunted him, saying, "O anointed one, prophesy who it is who is striking you."
O sacred head now wounded, with grief and shame weighed down, now ye crown, O sacred head, what glory, what bliss till now was thine, yet though despised and gory, I joy to call thee mine. What the mine would have suffered was all for sinners' gain. Mine was the transgression, but thine the deadly pain. Lord, here I fall, my Savior, 'tis I deserve thy place. Look on me with thy favor, and grant to me thy grace.
Now Peter was warming himself in the courtyard when a small slave girl entered. She confronted Peter and said, "You also were with this Jesus of Nazareth." Peter quickly gave a denial. I do not know what you are talking about, he replied, and went outside into the gateway. Meanwhile, the cock crowed. The slave girl followed Peter out and said to the bystanders, "This man is one of them." Again, Peter denied knowing Jesus. After a little while, the bystanders said directly to Peter, Surely you are one of them, for you speak with a Galilean accent." Then Peter began to swear with an oath at him as it crowed for the second time. And immediately Peter remembered how Jesus had said to him, "Before the cock crows twice, you will deny me 3 times." He went out and he wept bitterly. All of the chief priests, Pilate, the imperial Roman governor. When Judas saw what was happening, he knew that Jesus was doomed, and he repented. He returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and confessed, "I have sinned in betraying innocent blood." Judas threw down the 30 pieces of silver in the temple. Then he went out and hanged himself. Picking up the 30 pieces of silver, the chief priest said, "It is unlawful to put this silver into the treasury, for it is blood money." Whereupon they used the money to buy the potter's field for the burial of strangers. Therefore, that field is known to this day as the field of blood. Jesus stood before the Roman governor as the accusers made their charge. "We found this man perverting our nation," they said. "He was forbidding us to pay taxes to the emperor and proclaiming himself anointed king." The governor asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus answered, "You have said so." The chief priests were accusing him of many things. Therefore Pilate again spoke to Jesus. "Have you no answer to give? Look at how many accusations they are making." Jesus astonished Pilate by remaining silent.
Crucified my Lord, and he never said a mumbling word. They crucified my Lord, and he never said a word, not a word, not a word. They nailed him to a tree, and he never said a mumbling word. They nailed him to a tree, and he never said a mumbling word, not a word, not a word, not a word. pierced him in the side, and he never said a mumbling word. They pierced him in the side, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. The blood came trickling down, and he never said a mumbling word. The blood came trickling down, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word. He bowed his head and died, and he never said a mumbling word. He bowed his head and died, and he never said a mumbling word. Not a word, not a word, not a word.
At the feast of the Passover, the governor used to release a prisoner, and some were urging Pilate to do so at this time. Now there was a notable rebel in prison with those who had committed murder during the insurrection. His name was Barabbas. Therefore, the chief priests arranged a demonstration to demand Barabbas. Pilate asked them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, the Anointed One?" The demonstrators shouted, "Barabbas!" Pilate responded, "What shall I do with this Jesus, the Anointed One?" And the crowds shouted, "Crucify him!" Pilate continued, "Are you certain of his guilt?" And the crowd took up the chant, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Again Pilate spoke, "Shall I crucify your king?" "We have no king but Caesar," cried the demonstrators. Then Pilate agreed to release Barabbas, but Jesus, the Anointed One, he handed over to the soldiers for scourging and crucifixion. The soldiers led Jesus away within the governor's palace. There they assembled a whole battalion. They clothed Jesus in royal purple. Then they set a crown of thorns on his head and shoved a reed between his fingers for a scepter. They began to mock him by kneeling before him and proclaiming, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They also spat on him and smote him on the head with a stick. And then, after mocking him, they took away the purple robe and returned his own clothes and brought him out to crucify him. On the road, they met Simon of Cyrene coming in from the countryside. They compelled him to carry the cross. They brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means skull. There they crucified him. They offered him wine mingled with myrrh, but he refused it. His garments they divided among themselves, casting lots for them. Over his head they inscribed the charge against him, the King of the Jews. Also, there were 2 insurrectionists crucified with him, one on the right and one to his left. Those who passed by were shaking their heads in scorn and saying, "So you could destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days? Save yourself. Come down from the cross." Likewise, the priestly collaborators mocked him as they said to one another, "He saved others, himself he cannot save. Let the Anointed One, the King of Israel, come down from the cross that we may see and believe." Even the 2 crucified with him reviled him. Now from midday there was, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani," words that mean, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of the bystanders said, "Look, he is calling for Elijah." One of them put a sponge full of vinegar on a stick and laid it to his lips. Others said, "Wait, let us see whether Elijah will come and take him down." Then Jesus, having uttered a loud cry, breathed his last.
Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Were you there when they crucified my Lord? Oh, sometimes it causes me